Rage 2 is set in a version of Earth after a massive asteroid takes out most of humanity. What's left is a Mad Max-esque wasteland, factions fighting for control, mutants living in the sewers, and pink mohawk-toting goons are all present. The marketing for Rage 2 would suggest that the sequel to the original game, set 30 years in the future, would be a more bombastic, neon punk, and vibrant world. But does the game deliver? If there's one reason to play Rage 2, it's just how well it plays. Even after about 15 hours, I found myself returning to bandit camps just to see enemies turn to gib. The gunplay handles tightly and the hit registration is immensely satisfying. With your assault rifle, headshots result in a gratifying crunch, and the shotgun is definitely in the running for best video game shotguns of all time. Not only does the effective distance and spread feel perfect, but the audio design and alt-fire make it super satisfying. The alt-fire allows you to aim down sights and then fire a slug which launches enemies backwards and splatters them against walls. Coupled with your weapons, you'll also have a variety of abilities to add to the mix. Between double jumping, dashing, ground slams, force pushes and vortex, and more, you'll have a lot to add into combat scenarios that make for fast-paced and relatively interesting matchups. Running into bandit camps, sprinting around, and cycling through my weapons and abilities really never got old. The gunplay is really tight and satisfying and makes a really good first impression for the game. Visually, Rage 2 is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, the gun models are crisp, the open wasteland during the daytime can be gorgeous, and the gore and explosions are over the top and fun to look at. On the other, dark areas have some really terrible looking contrast and artifacts, and objects in the distance will often pop in, and some have muddy textures. That being said, there is some fantastic eye candy in this game, mainly in the form of fast-paced action. Areas are loaded with explosive barrels, enemies turn into a fountain of brains and giblets, Feltrite flies out of enemies, and bullets whiz by you. All of this creates a busy but fun to look at experience. Story-wise, Rage 2 wasn't good or bad, it was just kinda not memorable. It lasts around 10 hours, and that time might vary depending on how much or little of the side content you choose to engage with. The interesting part of the main storyline is how it lets you progress through it. After the prologue, the game sets you off on your own and wants you to meet with 3 NPCs to figure out how to take down the big bad guy, General Cross. While the game does suggest you visit a specific character first, it doesn't prevent you from meeting them in whatever order you see fit. Once you meet each character, you'll have a narrative story mission, and then they too send you off on your own, and your only goal is to complete open world activities to power each ally up. All of this freedom is the type of thing you want out of an open world game. Freedom to tackle the game's problems at your pace and in ways that suit your preference. Unfortunately, this is sort of where Rage 2 starts to break down. The type of activities range from bandit camps, arcs, refueling stations, power stations, random buildings, authority towers, bounties, convoys, races, and wave-based side events, and more. The downside here is that with some exception, most of these things tend to play out the same. You'll mark a spot on the map, drive there, get one piece of recycled dialogue, and begin killing everything in sight. Once you kill everything, you can stick around to loot the various storage boxes or art chests, or collect any data pads that happen to be lying around. In some of these places, you'll have to destroy a gas tank or let a generator overload, but all in all, these kind of come off the same. Thankfully, the game's combat is fun enough to engage with that you won't necessarily mind knocking out the required side content, because if it wasn't, you'd maybe want to quit after seeing just how little variety there is in the objectives available to you. In an attempt to make the world feel less empty, you'll often see enemies fighting on the side of the road, or a balloon waiting to be shot down. However, quickly you'll see through the cracks and figure out just how little of that stuff matters. The enemies will just drive by you, no one will pay any attention, they're just there as window dressing. And without reason to engage with it, it just becomes a needless distraction from the otherwise barren open world. Thankfully, there are a couple of interesting things to do in the world, the most important of which are arcs. Although arcs will play out the same as something like a bandit camp, there is a tangible reward waiting for you at the end. Arcs are where you will find all of the game's weapons and abilities. You'll be given a short tutorial on how to use whatever it is you receive, and then you'll be sent off to enjoy them. Weapons and abilities are both upgradable, and you'll have a miniature skill tree that will let you enhance or alter how they're used. You'll get things like larger ammo reserves or faster reload speeds, but there will also be unique perks like returning ammo to your weapon upon kill. Similarly, abilities have their own perks to unlock as well, which can make them more powerful, shorten their cooldown, or increase their utility. And if upgrading your abilities and weapons wasn't enough, your NPC friends will have beneficial projects for you to unlock, and you'll be able to upgrade your overall health, damage, or overdrive at the Cyberdock. So the game does give you reasons to complete the tasks in the open world, but it's sorta up to you to decide if those reasons are worth your time, or if you'll just do the bare minimum to progress the story. As nice as the freedom of choice is, the one complication it adds is that it's up to you to find all of your weapons and abilities scattered throughout the world. There are parts of the world you may never visit while you're doing your open world missions, and in turn you may miss out on a really cool weapon or ability if you aren't able to find the hidden arcs. This is obviously a design choice that was meant to encourage players to see more of the world, but it could be somewhat of a hindrance if you're already bored with what's there and you just want to get on with the story. On the subject of arcs, weapons, and abilities, one thing I do need to talk about is how much fun all the weapons are. As I mentioned earlier, the shotgun and the assault rifle are top-notch fun and provide nearly endless satisfaction. Other weapons like the grav dart launcher are fun to use and provide some physics goofiness. That being said, a few weapons are pretty lackluster. Although cool in design, the effectiveness of some of the guns make them a pretty bad choice over others, and in a game with only 8 weapons, outside of the 2 provided with a pre-order or digital deluxe version of the game, there's really not a whole lot of room for weapons that aren't super fun to use. The last thing I want to touch on is the vehicles and vehicular combat. The game actually has a surprising amount of vehicles in it, and your primary vehicle is able to be customized with weapons and abilities as well. Vehicles you find throughout the world can be driven back to a town and stored so you can later call them up in a menu and spawn them for a small fee. The feel of the driving ranges from okay with some vehicles to sluggish with others and downright not worth using with a select few. The game even has a flying vehicle which will let you traverse the wasteland with almost too much ease. The actual combat is primarily done via lock-on as you drive, so it requires minimal effort from the player to put out damage as you go. As someone who spent most of their childhood playing Twisted Metal, Vigilante 8, and Interstate 76, anytime I see vehicular combat in games, I'm immediately intrigued. The Convoy side missions allow you to chase down a convoy of enemy vehicles in Mad Max fashion. You'll take down the supporting motorcycles and cars and eventually work on whatever the big target is. At high speeds, there's a lot happening in these encounters, and although they don't take a lot of effort, they're really fun to look at. Potentially the most bizarre part of Rage 2 is how unessential the vehicles in vehicular combat are to the core game. There's one mission involving racing and one that involves combat, but outside of that, there's almost no reason to engage with any sort of vehicular combat. The vehicular combat feels like a bit of a forgotten idea, and that's sort of the way a lot of Rage 2 feels. There's some really good systems in the game, but in general, the game doesn't require or encourage you to engage with them. From a pure shooting perspective, Rage 2 excels and is absolutely worth playing. Sadly, the rest of the game feels half-baked and some weird design choices hinder the game from reaching the highs that the shooting deserves. Rage 2 isn't a bad game by any means. I had fun playing and don't regret my time with it, but I also wasn't compelled to complete the rest of the open world activities after the story was completed. Should you buy Rage 2? Maybe. I'd probably suggest waiting for a sale, but depending on how much you value good shooting mechanics, it may be worth your time at full price. But I'll leave that up to you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.